And you had mentioned ego death previously there. And what do you think if a narcissist were to take a psychedelic? Maybe
Yeah,
it's ayahuasca, LSD,
yeah,
mushrooms, some fill in the blank.
yeah.
Like,
People
what do you
ask
think would
this.
happen?
People ask this all the time. It's not good. Those substances like show you yourself. And if the true self of a narcissist is like basically trapped in infancy or is empty, and all it does is cut through the grandiose false self, it's not an ego death, it's psychic collapse.
Mm.
That's one way. The other way would be just reinforcing their delusions of grandeur, where they become God, basically. Psychedelics, like, in some ways enhance what you already are, right? I don't really like the term ego death so much because I think we misunderstand ego function. It's almost like more like identity death,
Mm.
and I'm not sure that those words are interchangeable. Like my dad caught me taking psychedelics when I was like 16, 17 or something. And like, he's a yoga meditation teacher with no self-awareness. He goes, "Oh, that's going to kick the door open. Meditation will slowly open." And that's all he said. So I was like, "So are you telling me to take more of them?"
Ah.
But what it did was set me off on this kind of quest to try to figure out what is this link between meditation and psychedelics. And to me, it's about conditioning. It's about cutting, like think of consciousness like a window, and like our experience, our traumas fog up the window, and the psychedelics are like 409 on the window of consciousness that wipe it clear for a little time, so we might see what life is like without the trauma, without the kind of, like, Buddhists would call it like dukkha, like negative conditioning or whatever. And so with the narcissist, like, there's nothing there, right, to see, right. And so um, in order for it to work, there'd have to be like some shaman that would like manage that psychic collapse and rebuild them basically from infancy into a person. But I just like, I don't see it.
No, I
I
don't
have a
see it either.
follower on Instagram that's like a guide, and he talks about them like reacting violently. But it's because, like, I always say, like, one of the differences between BPD and NPD is a lot of times with BPD, if you show them their true self, they react positively. I made a video once that's had a life of its own, and therapists hate it, but I was talking like nicely about BPD. It got watched 7 million times on TikTok, but it was just went viral. This was 5 years ago, 4 years ago. It just went viral again without me. They just use it as a voice. And it made hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people cry good tears saying, "I've never felt this seen before." Now, the therapist will say that it's not always narcissistic parents, but they're fundamentally missing what I'm doing. That was a response to a specific person in my community of children of narcissists. And I talked about it as a response to narcissistic abuse. And when you showed all of these people diagnosed with BPD themselves, they started crying good tears. If you show a narcissist their self, you should probably duck. like run, because it's gonna be rage, right? If you poke through that thing. And so,
What did you
um,
say about the borderlines?
well, I just said that, like, there's a real person beneath the borderline, that a lot of times, not always, and I know people have a lot of trouble with borderlines. I think it's irresponsibly diagnosed, and a lot of times it's actually narcissism. And so this isn't to excuse any experience people have had, but I think in some ways it's the mirror of narcissism, that the only real objective thing is the definition of it, right? Because to diagnose it is subjective, right? And so if we're observing somebody diagnosed with BPD, we can't pull the BPD out of the body and observe it. We're observing somebody that's been subjectively diagnosed. So to me, the only objective data is the description, the diagnostic criteria. And to me, when you read it, the characteristics, it reads like somebody that's been in that's narcissistically defended, right? Shaky
Mm.
relationships, emotional explosions. Well, if you're living a life of complete emotional repression, that cork is going to explode sometimes. But I've learned more about it since then, and so I probably would word it very differently. Um, but what I'm trying to do is make content that either resonates or doesn't. I don't believe there are definitive answers to any of this. So I know there have been some therapists that didn't like that video, claiming like it was like kissing their ass or telling them what they wanted to hear. But like, some people need to be spoken to with compassion, and BPD is one of those things where therapists won't work with them. A lot of times it is the scapegoat disorder, that you have narcissism on the other side. And so I mean, forgive me for speaking with compassion about something that is usually lacking. And you know, I mean, since then I've done like some more research into it. I have a friend who's a BPD researcher at Columbia, and she let me do, like, she has a whole program about recovering. And so I've learned a lot, you know, that it is much more, you know, profoundly disruptive. But I guess to me, it's more a statement of the way it's diagnosed, and that if so many people were responding by crying good tears and saying, I've never felt this seen before. And if it did, you know, it either resonate, you know, my content is not me, I'm not an expert. What I want is to resonate or not resonate. And if it resonates with people, that's good to me. If it doesn't, they can just scroll on. Not everything is like, you know, that there are no definitive answers to this stuff, you know. And they would say, well, it's not always the children of narcissists. Nobody ever said it was. Right? Like, it's like if I go share a story about my experience, it doesn't have to apply to everybody. It's not meant to. I don't think like this stuff works that way.
I think it's very helpful to give them that empathetic approach, because if those people are going to be getting help, that's
Right.
a good way to get them to be open and
You have
honest
to talk
and
to people in
vulnerable.
ways that they can hear it, that will help them. So
Yeah.
what is the goal? To like lord like shame over them? They're already drowning in shame, right? Like BPDers hate themselves. And so, and don't get me started on this comorbid thing. It makes no sense to me. How can you be,
Oh,
and how can you be pathologically incapable of guilt and drowning in guilt? It doesn't, as an experience, it doesn't make any sense. BPD and NPD can't be comorbid, and they'll say there's 40% comorbidity. Yeah, if you're diagnosing based on behavioral traits. But if you're looking at the core experience as a human being, and understanding them both, they're not, it's mutually exclusive. Like it can't, you know, that might be
you expand
controversial.
on that, because I know there's people that will disagree with that part, because some people will say 60% of the
Yeah.
cluster B disorders can be comorbid. So, what do you mean when you say that the pathological guilt and too little guilt can't be
Well, I
comorbid?
mean, the people that believe that narcissism is a failed individuation from the parent, right? If you're looking at, say, Melanie Klein's progression of development, right? The paranoid schizoid position moves into the depressive position when the child learns to hold good and bad in the same container, and then guilt is formed. And that guilt is what transitions them from one phase to the next. And so if you believe that to be the core of pathological narcissism, they don't ever develop the capacity to feel guilt. If you talk to people with BPD, they feel guilt, right? That a lot of times they're drowning in guilt. A lot of times, you know, and again, this is difficult to talk about because there's no objective diagnostic criteria. Again, it's like if you're studying cancer, you pull the cancer out of the body and you observe the cancer, right? You can't do that with these disorders. So the thing you're observing is somebody that's been subjectively diagnosed by a therapist of unknown capabilities who's seeing a very small sample size of behavior. I mean, I don't mean to be dismissive, but like you go see 5 different therapists on 5 different days, you might get 5 different diagnoses, right? I mean,
Sure.
and so I don't know. I have a hard time with BPD because I guess I just have more sympathy for it than I do for NPD. You
Well,
know?
like, what it could be, I think maybe you're referring to going back to the operating system part. There's
Yeah.
a narcissistic operating system, and perhaps what you're saying is a narcissistic and borderline operating system can't both be present. And there's
Well,
a
the
difference.
behaviors can look the same, but I don't
Sure.
think I don't, I think there are internal experiences and emotional kind of like limitations. I just don't see it
Let me see if
as
I can articulate what I mean here. So, I think there's such a thing as a borderline operating system, that there
yeah,
might be a genetic predisposition for some of that. And they might have some narcissistic behaviors,
right.
but that's not the same as a full blown narcissistic operating system.
Right. Well, if you're diagnosing narcissism, and this drives me nuts, as 5 out of 9 traits, then yeah, it could be comorbid because a BPDer most likely does have 5 out of 9 narcissistic traits. But if you're actually looking past the traits and the behaviors and into the internal experience of what they're actually feeling and experiencing, it becomes something very different, right? And this is why I don't like the traits-based stuff. And I think it's how we've gotten to a place where everybody's calling everybody else a narcissist, because everybody has narcissistic traits. And from one person's perspective, I mean, I guess I have a real hard time with that diagnostic criteria. As somebody that was raised by a pathological narcissist, I don't find it to be a collection of traits. I find it to be like this operating system, this Ouroboros of like limitation. They're trapped in their own kind of consciousness, and they can't. They can't. The reason they can't heal is there's nothing to go back to, right? There's no baseline. But again, I mean, the BPD thing, like. It just seems like so heavily stigmatized, and like sometimes it's about understanding what connects to a person. If I thought you could tell NPD the truth about themselves and it would help them, then I would do that too. But the experience is, if you tell them the truth about their behavior, they have their defense mechanisms that kick in that can't accept, like they'll always interpret an accurate description of themselves as an attack because it falls outside of their ability to control the narrative.
Now, you got me thinking also, going back to the psychedelics part, I see a lot of narcissistic people that I think also have that operating system as well.
Mm-hmm.
They do all sorts of psychedelics, but then they
Mm-hmm.
never seem to have that spiritual awakening where they actually carry that forth.
No, the
into their
psychedelic
life.
warrior becomes their grandiose false self,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes,
Like
yes.
that becomes their persona, and they're the ones that are going on 10 ayahuasca retreats
Yeah,
a
yes.
year, which is totally not the fucking point, right? Like it's not the point. It's like Alan Watts was talking about psychedelics, and he says, when you get the message, hang up the phone, right? And that's the vibe, is
I
that
love that. I never heard that.
they are vehicles. They are not recreational drugs, right? I mean, and not everybody, like I used to go on fish tour as a kid and like macrodose the hell out of it for a summer, but it didn't give me spiritual awakenings, because they're not, it's not the substance alone. It's the intent. It's what we're bringing to the party, what we're trying to do. I mean, but I look at it like meditation. I mean, there's so many narcissists in the new age community, but it's a narcissist will wear any mask. We'll find them anywhere, right? That's the other thing, where it's like, they are, especially in the healing community, if their perpetual victimhood is a component of it, and they're always cycling between, victim and savior, grandiosity and victimhood. But it's like, there's a lot of them hiding in healing communities,
You better believe it. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's the other thing about it too, right? Where any insight someone gets in a psychedelic experience, if you don't bring those lessons or the message, as Alan Watts would say, into your day-to-day life, what good was that experience to you anyway, for
Right.
one? And
Well,
I
that's the
see,
whole integration part. If we wipe that window of consciousness clean and we get a glimpse of what it might feel like to be unhindered by our traumas, we then have to learn how to integrate that into our normal experience and use what we've seen, not just go back for more.
and that's the other thing. I don't think it can truly shatter their operating system either,
We can't.
if they have that operating system. If anything, it's just going to twist and distort the message that plant medicine
Yeah, it
or
matters
whatever.
who we are to begin with, right? Like it can't take a Mac and turn it into a PC, And so it's, I think, like everything else, psychedelics are becoming a commodity for a consumer culture that wants to buy the status of healed. And that's not something you can buy. Nobody can do it for you. You do it yourself. It's ugly and hard, or it doesn't happen, right? I mean,
There's no people want to see it as a magic cure. Like, oh,
yeah,
you take acid or ayahuasca, you'll get an ego death, and you'll never be the same. It's like,
yeah.
well, not quite. I think the only people
I
that are
find it
saying
to be
that,
fleeting, and I've been doing these things since I was a kid, with intent. And like, I'm actually more scared of them now than I've ever been, like not
interesting.
like a healthy fear of,
I can
like,
see that.
maybe respect is the right word, where it's like, I don't see them as child's play, that to truly kind of use them in the way that's necessary. And I hate microdosing, actually, but like, I know it works. I just feel like they're rebranding it away from the experience. That it's like, it's like what this culture needs is a rite of passage, right? Is ritual. All of our rituals have become routine, which is to say, all of the meaning is extracted from them. And so one thing psychedelics do is provide a an ordeal, basically, right? Where a trip, you go through something and you come out the other side and you try to make sense of it. If you take a dose so small as to, bypass the experience, it may work. It does work. It's great, but that's just taking a pill. That's not true. To me, the psychedelic part is the experience, not the substance, right? And so I just worry, and Terence McKenna talked about this, that like they'll dilute it so much that it'll lose all of its meaning, and big pharma gets its hand on it, and all of a sudden 50 years from now nobody understands that. I just, maybe that's gatekeeping, but
I don't think it's gatekeeping. I think taking a psychedelic can be, as they say, taking an elevator to the top of Mount Everest. I forget who had said that, but you get all these insights, but you might not be prepared for those insights either. If someone's not a narcissist or borderline, whatever, you might not be prepared to hear it. And it's similar to what you were saying about when someone is on an SSRI or SNRI, you might get some temporary physical relief, but are you able to understand, okay, what do I need to do moving forward here? I just bypass something to make me more productive.
I think that cuts to the core of like mental health healing, if we're going to call it that, which is it about just manipulating brain chemistry or manipulating the physical to yield the kind of like just bypass how we might get there, And again, this isn't meant to judge, but to kind of observe and look at. And I think, to me, we do lose something in those situations. That it's not to say don't do them or that they don't help. They absolutely do. But it's bypassing the experiential kind of component of truly getting our minds different, right? Of doing the work to kind of reconstruct the neural pathways. I mean, the problem, again, I think goes back to our culture, which doesn't give us the time. We have to go back to work. We have to, we have all of these things that are going on that we don't really have the time to kind of exit society and really work on this stuff. And ultimately, I think it's just kind of sad,
Right. I mean, there's a big difference between seeing it as a medicine and then seeing it as a recreational drug, or seeing it as with an intent to have a spiritual experience. A lot of people are just doing them as a recreational experience.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like people should do what makes them happy, And I think there's always a little bit of a component of like with them of glimpsing something different, right? Like even in recreational use, but again, it's like, to me, it's about respect. Are we respecting that these are substances in various forms that have been part of the human experience forever, basically? Right. There were studies that showed the early Christian Eucharist had ergot root in it, which is where LSD comes from. I would kind of laugh at that, where like they decided, oh, we can't give you a real glimpse of God. Here, take this alcohol now. We'll switch it out because we want to be the middleman between the divine and the mundane. But I think acknowledging that this is a universal human experience, that the psychedelic, I don't think it's as simple as like the stoned ape theory that like apes ate mushrooms and then all of a sudden consciousness is born. But I do think there's some truth to that. I do believe there's some role that they played in advancement, I don't.
It probably contributed a little bit.
A little bit. I mean, they existed. The primates were eating everything. It's certainly not as simple as causality.